John Mercer had always lived on the edge of the solar colony of Epsilon 4, a small dusty settlement on a barren moon. Most people thought him strange, a man content with his own company, tending to his tiny garden and fixing old machines that no one else cared about. He liked it that way, quiet, simple, and predictable. Humanity had spread across the stars, but John never sought glory, power, or attention. He found peace in small things, the hum of a solar panel, the glow of a distant sun, and the taste of fresh fruit from his hydroponic garden. One evening, as the orange sun dipped below the horizon, John stepped outside to check the solar panels. The wind was sharp, carrying fine dust that clung to his clothes, and the sky was a pale swirl of purple and gray. That's when he saw them. Two creatures, small and trembling, crouched near the edge of the colony. At first he thought they were animals, some exotic species that had drifted through space somehow. But as they moved closer, he realized they were intelligent, slender, fragile, almost translucent, with eyes that glowed softly like twin moons. Their bodies pulsed slightly with light, as if they were breathing energy rather than air. The creatures froze when they saw him, their luminous eyes wide with fear and curiosity. John's heart tightened. They were lost, scared, and clearly hungry. Without thinking, he reached into his backpack and pulled out the scraps of his dinner: protein cubes, small fruit rations, and a water pouch. He set them gently on the ground. "Here, take it," he whispered, his voice soft, careful not to scare them. They hesitated, their heads tilting in unison, their tiny mouths opening and closing as if trying to understand his intent. Finally, they approached. Tentatively, carefully, they began to eat. John watched, fascinated and strangely moved. Each bite seemed to brighten the light in their eyes, and he could feel a warmth spreading in his chest. He had never been close to anyone like this, and somehow in that quiet, lonely moment, he felt a connection that words could not describe. The aliens were small, delicate, almost childlike, yet their presence carried an otherworldly grace. John noticed that their eyes lingered on him even as they ate, glowing brighter with what he could only describe as trust. His loneliness, which had been his constant companion for decades, melted slightly, replaced with a deep, strange hope. He realized that in all his years, he had never truly interacted with a life form that was completely dependent on him, and the responsibility felt weighty, yet comforting. When they finished, the creatures stayed close, moving in small, graceful circles around his feet. John smiled, a genuine, soft smile that he hadn't felt in years. He spoke to them again, though he knew they could not understand his words. "You're safe here," he said. "I won't hurt you." One of them reached up and brushed against his hand with a glowing tendril. A shock of emotion surged through John, affection, gratitude, and a sense of awe so intense it brought tears to his eyes. He knelt down, letting them come closer, feeling as though the universe had folded into this tiny, fragile moment. For the first time in a long while, John felt like more than a solitary man on a forgotten moon. He was part of something bigger, something beyond understanding, and it was beautiful. And though he did not yet know it, those two small aliens were not just lost travelers, they were messengers, and their gratitude would ripple across the galaxy in ways John could never imagine. As night fell over Epsilon 4, John sat among the strange creatures, sharing what little food he had and watching the stars. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet, profound joy, and an unshakable sense that something extraordinary was about to begin. John thought the moment was over. The two small aliens had eaten their fill and were resting quietly near his feet. He felt a rare, fragile peace. For a long time, the silence of his home had been comforting, but now it felt alive, filled with the subtle hum of the creatures' glowing bodies. He watched them mesmerized, unaware of the changes already unfolding beyond the horizon. He returned to his workshop to finish repairing a malfunctioning energy generator. The hum of machinery usually calmed him, but tonight it sounded different, tenser, charged with an invisible energy. That's when he noticed it. Strange signals flickering on his comm panel. He frowned. The radio waves were unlike anything from the colony or known satellites. Patterns that repeated with perfect precision, almost like a code. Yet he couldn't understand it. At first, John tried to dismiss it. It had to be interference, a glitch in the system, but the signals grew stronger, more persistent, echoing in his devices like a heartbeat he couldn't ignore. A cold knot of unease formed in his stomach. Something was coming. Something immense, curiosity overcame fear. John stepped outside again, scanning the barren moon. The sky had darkened, painted in shades of violet and silver, but there was movement. Faint, almost imperceptible outlines that streaked across the stars far faster than anything human technology could produce. His heart began to pound. The two small aliens stirred, their luminous bodies pulsing in response to the sky. They floated closer to him, eyes fixed on the horizon, making soft musical sounds that vibrated in his chest. John realized they were communicating with the incoming force. His pulse quickened. They weren't just travelers. They were calling someone, something. John's mind raced. He had fed two helpless creatures, and now he had no idea what he had set in motion. The signals continued to intensify, the subtle vibrations in the air now forming a tangible pressure, pressing down on him, making him feel small, vulnerable, and powerless. He ran his hands through his hair, heart hammering as fear and awe battled inside him. Suddenly, the creatures rose into the air, spinning slowly. Their light brightened, casting glowing reflections across the barren ground. And then, for a moment, everything went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause and the signals vanished. John's chest tightened. He had a sense that the silence was heavier than noise, that something vast was holding its breath. And then came the first glimpse. A faint shimmer, like heat rising from the desert, forming shapes in the distance. Shapes that grew sharper, moving with precision yet impossibly fast. The outline of hundreds of ships became visible, stretching across the horizon. John staggered backward, mind struggling to comprehend the enormity. "They're coming," he whispered, almost too quietly to hear. The two small aliens circled him protectively. Their light pulsed in tandem, sending waves of calm through John even as terror clawed at his thoughts. He realized they had called these beings. They were waiting for them, not for him. And somehow their small presence had the power to control the tide of what was approaching. For the first time in his life, John felt the weight of destiny pressing on him. A simple act of kindness, feeding two lost, frightened creatures, had set in motion something far beyond human understanding. And though he did not yet know whether it would bring salvation or destruction, he could sense that the galaxy itself had begun to notice him. He looked up at the stars, now streaked with the glimmer of approaching shapes. His chest tightened with fear, awe, and a strange, fragile hope. Whatever happened next, John Mercer knew one truth with absolute certainty. The universe had been touched by the smallest act of kindness, and nothing would ever be the same again. 19 minutes had passed since John had fed the two small aliens. 19 minutes since a quiet, ordinary evening had become something unthinkable. And now, the sky above Epsilon 4 was no longer just dark. It was alive with movement. Alive with power that made the ground tremble beneath his feet. At first, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. Shadows stretched across the horizon, forming shapes so vast and precise they could not have been built by human hands. And then the shapes solidified. Thousands of alien warships, their hulls glinting in the fading light of the twin suns. Their engines pulsed with a soft blue energy, casting eerie reflections on the dust below. John froze, unable to comprehend the scale. Thousands, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation, a silent army that stretched beyond the horizon. His mind raced. He had no weapons, no shield, nothing to protect himself or the colony. Panic clawed at him, and for the first time in years, John felt utterly powerless. The two small aliens hovered in front of him, glowing brighter than ever. Their light was gentle, almost soothing, yet it carried authority. They chirped and pulsed, sounds and patterns John could barely perceive. It was clear now the fleet was responding to them, not him. The creatures had called for help, and help had come, but John's heart still thudded in terror. The ship's size and number were overwhelming, and their weapon arrays were visible even from here, sharp, metallic, and terrifying. The instinct to run, to hide, to prey surged inside him, but as he glanced down at the small aliens at his feet, he felt a strange calm wash over him. They trusted him. Somehow he realized that trust meant something to the approaching fleet. The warships halted above the colony, hovering silently. The hum of their engines vibrated through the ground, through John's bones, a constant reminder of the unimaginable power surrounding him. And then, something even stranger happened. One of the tiny aliens floated upward, reaching toward the largest ship. Its light intensified, pulsing in rhythm with the ship's energy. The warship seemed to respond, tilting, lowering shields as though listening. John's mouth went dry. He realized that these creatures were not just small beings, they were leaders, communicators, beings capable of commanding a fleet that could destroy entire planets. His fear did not vanish, but it shifted. It became awe mixed with hope. John had fed 2 lost creatures, offered them care when no one else would, and now the galaxy was watching. And perhaps, just perhaps, his small act of kindness had bought humanity a chance. The fleet did not attack. Instead, the ships hovered, forming a protective ring around the colony. Their massive energy shields shimmered, casting a translucent glow over the buildings and the barren ground. John could feel the warmth of their attention, almost like the universe itself was breathing around him. He sank to his knees, overwhelmed. Tears stung his eyes, not from fear, but from an emotion deeper, more profound. Humanity, fragile and chaotic, had been recognized, not for weapons, not for conquest, but for a simple act of compassion. 2 small lives had changed everything. The tiny aliens returned to his side, their bodies glowing softly now as if satisfied. John reached out, gently brushing his hand against one of them. It pulsed in response, a subtle vibration that felt like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. In that moment, John knew something extraordinary. The universe had noticed the good in humanity, however small, and it had answered in the only way it knew how, through overwhelming, incomprehensible power tempered by trust and understanding. Above, the alien fleet remained, a breathtaking display of cosmic might. John stayed on the ground, staring up, trembling yet filled with hope. In 19 minutes, his life had changed forever, and he knew deep in his heart that this was only the beginning. John's knees sank into the dusty ground as he stared at the immense alien fleet hovering above Epsilon 4. Thousands of ships, each larger than anything humans had ever built, stretched across the sky. Their engines hummed with silent power. Their weapons glimmered with deadly precision. John's mind raced, trapped between awe and terror. He thought of the colony below, families, workers, children who had no way to defend themselves against such a force. He imagined the destruction that would follow if these ships were hostile. A cold sweat ran down his back. He felt tiny, insignificant, and utterly powerless. The 2 small aliens hovered closer, glowing brightly in the dim light. Their eyes locked on his, sending a silent message he could somehow understand. They were urging him to act, to show that humanity could be trusted. But what could he do? What choice did a single man have against an armada that could wipe out everything in minutes? John looked down at his hands. They were ordinary hands, hands that had fed, built, and fixed, but never fought. Yet in that instant he realized something profound. This was not about weapons or strength. It was about trust. Humanity's value was not in its power, it was in its choices. He straightened, his chest tight but determined. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, a universal gesture of peace. His voice trembled as he spoke, though he knew the aliens might not understand the words. I mean no harm. We are not your enemies, please. Trust us. The small aliens pulsed with light in response. John could feel waves of energy ripple from them, almost like they were amplifying his intentions, sending a message to the massive fleet above. It was a simple act, but in the silent, tense moments that followed, John realized that it might be all that mattered. The alien ships paused, hovering in perfect stillness. John's heart pounded in his chest. Fear gripped him again, but this time it was mingled with hope. Slowly, one of the ships tilted its massive frame, energy shields flickering like the pulse of a living creature. The fleet was listening. The fleet was waiting. John's mind raced with the weight of responsibility. Every life in the colony depended on what he did next. One wrong move, one gesture of aggression, and it could all end. And yet he felt a strange calm. He had fed 2 alien strays, simple creatures who needed care. That act, small and human, had set this chain of events into motion, and now he had to trust that kindness could ripple even across the galaxy. The 2 small aliens rose higher, glowing brighter, their forms radiant and powerful. They circled him once more, then extended a tendril toward him, pulsing gently. John reached out without hesitation. The contact sent a shiver through his body, but it was not fear, it was connection. It was understanding. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "We want peace. We can choose kindness." And then it happened. The massive fleet responded. Shields glimmered, engines slowed, And for the first time, John felt that the immense power above him was not poised to destroy but to protect. The choice had been made, not by weapons, not by numbers, but by trust, by empathy, and by one human's willingness to act with compassion. Tears filled John's eyes as he sank to the ground again. He had faced the impossible, and the universe had listened. The weight of the moment pressed on him, yet it was filled with a strange, beautiful clarity. Humanity had been seen, not as conquerors, but as beings capable of kindness. And in that moment, John understood the true measure of strength. The small aliens returned to hover at his side, glowing softly, as if acknowledging his courage. John looked up at the sky, at the vast fleet that could have destroyed them all, and felt an overwhelming gratitude. In this quiet, barren place, he had made a choice that would echo across the stars, and it had changed everything. The alien fleet remained in the sky, vast and silent like a living canopy of power above Epsilon 4. John sat on the dusty ground, staring upward, still trembling from the sheer scale of what had arrived. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the enormity of it all. These were not just ships, they were sentient, controlled by minds far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. And yet they were waiting because of two small creatures he had fed. The tiny aliens hovered near him, their glowing bodies pulsing softly. John reached out and one of them brushed against his hand. The sensation was electric, not painful but alive, as if the very essence of understanding flowed between them. In that moment he realized something incredible. This was communication without words, a connection that transcended language, species, and even thought. The fleet shifted slightly, moving as one. The shields that had seemed so threatening now shimmered like a protective dome around the colony. John's heart soared. They were not here to destroy. They were here to watch, to protect, to judge. And they had chosen trust over aggression. He slowly rose to his feet, eyes scanning the alien warships. Each ship seemed to pulse with life, engines vibrating with a subtle rhythm that resonated through his chest. He realized the creatures he had fed were not merely grateful. They were leaders, guiding these massive beings with a grace and authority he could barely comprehend. John's mind flashed to the colony below. Families would be safe tonight. Children would sleep without fear. The workers, the farmers, the simple lives of Epsilon 4, all untouched by the unimaginable power above. He felt a swell of pride, not for himself, but for humanity. The humans he had always doubted, who often seemed petty and selfish, had been recognized not for their strength, but for their capacity for kindness. Then the tiny aliens did something unexpected. They pulsed brighter, and a wave of energy washed over John. It was not harmful. It was warm, soothing, and filled with understanding. Images, feelings, and ideas flooded his mind. He saw flashes of other worlds, other colonies, species struggling to survive, some thriving, others suffering. And through it all, he felt a single unifying thread: empathy. The universe valued the ability to care, to act with compassion, and to choose life over destruction. John sank to his knees again, tears blurring his vision. He felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility and gratitude. Humanity had been given a rare gift: recognition. Not for conquest, not for technology, not for war, but for something far more fragile and precious: the simple act of kindness. The fleet began to slowly rotate, forming a protective orbit around the colony. It was as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath, steadying its immense power so that life could continue below. John realized that this was more than protection. It was a promise that humanity had been seen, and that the universe would watch over those who chose empathy, even in the smallest ways. The tiny aliens returned to his side, their glow softening now, as if satisfied. John reached out, feeling a connection deeper than any he had ever known. He understood without words that the choices he had made, small, ordinary choices, could ripple across the stars in ways no one could measure. For the first time in his life, John felt truly part of something greater. The galaxy was vast, terrifying, and beautiful, and in a small, quiet moment on a barren moon, humanity had been acknowledged for the best of its nature. John looked at the stars again, and for the first time, he smiled. Not a small, private smile, but one that carried the weight of hope, courage, and the understanding that the universe could respond to even the simplest act of good. He whispered softly, almost as if speaking to the fleet itself. "Thank you for seeing us." And the stars above seemed to pulse in reply. The alien fleet lingered above Epsilon 4, silent yet vibrant, as if the stars themselves had descended to observe the colony. John Mercer stood among the two small glowing creatures, feeling a weight he had never experienced before, a mixture of awe, humility, and responsibility. The enormity of the moment pressed on him, yet it was filled with a strange, almost comforting clarity. The tiny aliens floated closer, their light pulsing rhythmically. John reached out and one of them touched his shoulder. The sensation was warm, almost like the sun itself had settled on his skin. Through this simple contact, he felt a flood of emotions: gratitude, trust, pride, and something deeper, a silent promise that he could not yet fully understand. Then the fleet shifted. It was subtle at first, the massive ships aligning in patterns John could barely comprehend. But soon beams of light began to descend, landing softly across the colony. Buildings and farms were bathed in a gentle glow. The energy was tangible but not dangerous. It was life-giving, healing. Machines hummed to life without power. Water systems purified instantly. Crops in the fields perked with new vitality. The gifts were beyond anything humanity had imagined, yet they arrived quietly, without fanfare or demand. John fell to his knees, overwhelmed. This was not conquest. This was not dominance. It was generosity on a scale beyond comprehension. And it was because of him, because of his small, ordinary act of feeding two lost, frightened creatures. His heart swelled with emotion. Humanity had been judged, and the verdict was not only mercy, but recognition of the best part of them, the capacity to care. The tiny aliens pulsed again, their light filling John's vision. He understood now that their purpose was not destruction but guidance, and that their fleet was a guardian, a protector of worlds capable of kindness. And with this realization came a profound hope. Perhaps the universe was not indifferent. Perhaps it noticed the choices of individuals, the small gestures that defined a species. Messages arrived next, not in words, but in feeling. Waves of gratitude and acknowledgement washed over John and through him, over the colony. It was as if the aliens were saying, "We see you. We trust you. You have chosen well." John could barely hold back tears. It was more than a gift. It was a connection, a bridge between worlds. The children of Epsilon 4 would grow up in safety. The farmers could cultivate their fields without worry, and the workers could sleep without fear of the unknown above. Humanity, fragile and small, had been seen, and John, a solitary man who had never sought recognition, had become the catalyst for this unprecedented moment. He glanced at the two small aliens. They hovered beside him, calm now, almost serene. Their eyes met his, glowing warmly, as if acknowledging his courage, his kindness, and the simple but powerful truth that one act of compassion could ripple through the universe. John felt something he had never known, a sense of purpose that extended beyond himself, beyond his lonely life on the edge of a distant moon. Humanity was part of something larger, something alive, and he had played a role, however small, in proving that they could be worthy of trust. The fleet slowly began to rise, engines glowing softly as the ships prepared to depart. John watched as the guardians of the stars lifted into the darkness, leaving behind not just gifts of technology and energy, but a promise, protection, guidance, and a chance for humanity to grow into the best version of itself. He sank to the ground, exhausted but elated. The enormity of what had happened pressed on him, yet he felt lighter than he ever had. For the first time, he understood that compassion, no matter how small, could echo across galaxies, could touch lives beyond measure, and could even influence forces beyond human comprehension. John looked up at the sky, now empty but still shimmering with residual light from the departing fleet. A smile spread across his face, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and wonder. Humanity had been seen, humanity had been judged, and humanity had passed not through war, but through kindness. In that quiet moment, on a barren moon with two tiny aliens glowing softly beside him, John Mercer understood a truth he would carry for the rest of his life. Even the smallest act of compassion could change the universe. Years had passed since that extraordinary night on Epsilon 4. The colony had flourished in ways no one could have imagined. Crops thrived, energy flowed freely, and knowledge from the alien fleet had transformed humanity's understanding of the stars. The people of Epsilon 4 often whispered about the event, calling it the Night of the Guardians, but only one person truly understood what had happened: John Mercer. John had aged, his hair streaked with silver, his hands lined from decades of work, but he still walked the dusty grounds of the colony with the same quiet determination. He had lived a simple life, but the universe had given him an extraordinary story to carry, one that reminded him, and everyone around him, that kindness mattered, even across the vast emptiness of space. Children would gather around him in the evenings, asking questions about the glowing fleet, about the small aliens, about how humanity had survived a test no one else even knew existed. John would smile softly, his eyes twinkling, and tell them a simple truth. Sometimes even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. He never spoke of heroism or fame. To him, it was not about glory, it was about connection. Feeding those two small alien strays had been a simple human gesture, yet it had echoed across the galaxy, altering the course of history for his entire species. John knew that the galaxy had witnessed not a man, but humanity at its best, capable of compassion, empathy, and trust. The colony had changed too. People became kinder, more thoughtful, more willing to help one another. The memory of the Night of the Guardians served as a constant reminder that their choices, no matter how small, could ripple far beyond what they could see. Humanity had been given a gift of perspective, a chance to grow in ways they had never imagined. John often thought of the two small aliens. Though they had returned to the fleet long ago, he felt their presence still, a gentle reminder that even tiny lives could wield unimaginable power when nurtured with care. At night, he would look at the stars, imagining their soft glow drifting across the galaxy, watching, smiling, and remembering. In the quiet moments, John reflected on the lesson that had changed everything. Strength was not measured in weapons, armies, or technology. Strength was measured in choices, in empathy, in the willingness to act with compassion when no one was watching. Humanity had proven that it could rise to the challenge not through conquest, but through simple goodness. Stories of that night spread across human colonies, whispered among workers, recorded in archives, and taught to children as a lesson in humility and hope. Scholars debated the nature of the fleet. Poets wrote verses about the two glowing aliens, and ordinary people remembered the message that courage could take many forms, even as small as feeding the hungry. John walked outside one evening, the twin suns setting behind him. He breathed deeply, feeling the quiet peace of the colony, the soft hum of life around him, somewhere far above the stars. He imagined the alien fleet gliding through the darkness, still watching, still protecting, still remembering the night a human had chosen kindness over fear. He smiled, a warm, peaceful smile. Humanity had been noticed, tested, and embraced, and it had passed the trial, not through war or domination, but through the enduring, quiet power of compassion. John Mercer, once a lonely man on a barren moon, had become part of a story that would echo across generations, across planets, across the stars themselves. In feeding two lost alien strays, he had sparked a chain of events that changed the course of history. And in that, he understood the universe's most profound truth. Even the smallest act of kindness could create ripples that reached farther than anyone could imagine. As night fell over Epsilon 4, John looked up at the glittering stars, feeling connected to something greater than himself, something infinite and alive, and he whispered softly, as if speaking to the universe itself, "Thank you for letting us be worthy." And somewhere far beyond the human eye, the stars pulsed gently in reply.